Welcome, everyone. And before introducing our distinguished guests, I just want to also recognize a special friend, Mitchell Nelson, who's a member of our Friends Committee here at the Council. It's a special group of loyal, particularly generous supporters who enjoy special access to Council events and will be working with our President Joe Rosenthal and the rest of us on our upcoming centennial in 2013-14. So it's a very exciting time ahead, and obviously we're always more than willing to welcome new friends to the Friends Committee. When we first started thinking about this session some time ago, Ron Bruder and I was going to make the statement in the beginning that it's a little bit off the beaten track of the U.S. Global Engagement Program that I direct here at the Council. But on further reflection, it occurred to me it's actually, it really is the essence of positive engagement when you look at it this way. It's a case of a U.S.-founded organization working with individuals, with institutions, with communities, particularly the business community, but beyond, and some of the most, as Ron and Jasmine will describe, and some of the places that we would like to see the effort made to train youth for education and employment. Getting to the heart of that matter is surely what engagement is all about in dealing with some pretty intractable issues and areas, and hence the title of tonight's talk, Putting Middle East Youth to Work. I've known Ron for basically since this was a gleam in the eye, I think, Ron, and he and Jasmine are the two people you want to hear this evening. So without any more ado whatsoever, I want to welcome Ron and Jasmine to the Council. And this is one of the more interesting, if not downright inspirational topics that I think we'll hear at the Council or indeed in any forum. So Education for Foundation for Employment, welcome to Carnegie Council.
Thank you, David. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming out on this cold, miserable evening. It takes a lot of courage to be here. I, Ron Bruder, had been a serial entrepreneur for 30 years, built shopping centers all over the U.S., developed a methodology to buy environmentally tainted properties, and was the largest purchaser of those in the 90s. And life was good until 9/11 happened. And I don't know where anybody else in this room was, but I was in Midtown by my office. My daughter was by the World Trade Center. She was in editorial department at Scholastic and watched people jumping from the tower, and it was somewhat traumatizing and changed her forever. And she and I after that spent many an evening talking about what happened, why it happened, and what could be done about it. And one of the companies I started was in the business, the pharmaceutical business. And we were licensing technologies globally. It was a concept that there were many technologies out there that could serve a very good purpose, but there wasn't the capital and there wasn't the business acumen. And it took me, of all places, in the 90s to Belfast. And we were doing business with both sides of the fence. And in those days, you couldn't do business openly with both sides of the fence. But our policy was that we were non-disclosive, totally confidential, so nobody knew who we were doing business with. And we managed to do a good swatch of business over 5 or 6 years. And I saw all the hatred between the religious factions, and I foolishly thought that it would continue forever. And then all of a sudden, in historical terms, a nanosecond, in about 5 years, people that were literally killing each other started to work together to make a killing. And so I went back there because I had missed it. I would have never guessed that we'd see it in my lifetime. And I spoke to people. I asked them why were they no longer taking pleasure out of doing each other in. And the answer that I got was they were too busy. And they were busy making a living, planning for their future, going on vacation, having money for their kids' education, thinking about investments. And that all came because unemployment dropped radically. The Celtic tiger roared, GNP went 4 times over a 5-year period. And the societal changes on that were amazing, were immense. And so after 9/11, I looked at the region, looked at the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa, and I said, what we really need there is a Marshall Plan. We need to do as the US did and embrace our enemies and rebuild our economies and make them our friends. And so I started meeting with people that were a lot smarter than I in this area, people such as Lee Hamilton, Baker Hamilton Commission, Moeen Qureshi, former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shibli Tilhami, the Anwar Sadat Peace Professor here, Ellen Lapson, who runs the Stimson Foundation, Mokhtar Labani, who was the ambassador to the OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference. And Mokhtar literally dropped what he was doing, and he and I went on the road for about 3 months to look at the problem and to figure out what potential solutions could be. And I also hired the Brookings Institution to give some insight. And what we learned was that the educational institutions in the region were not teaching what is needed in the workplace. And so that people would go through getting a reasonable education, but the skills they learned were not the skills that enabled them to get a job. And one of the key statistics that just makes it so paramount is you look in Jordan, and we do a lot of work in Amman and around Jordan. Unemployment for youth there is 12%. Unemployment, if you have a college degree, is 22%. Unemployment in the US right now for college graduates is 5%, roughly half. There it's almost double. Why is that the case? The skills that the kids are learning there are not what is needed by the labor market. So we set forward to try to bring answers, and the way we've gone about it is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. We go into these countries, we form standalone foundations in each country, the equivalent of a 501c3. The board of that 501c3 are leading industrialists from those countries. The staff in those countries are all local. And the challenge is to figure out where the jobs are and what tools could be needed to educate youth and get them into the labor force. And so we're doing that now in Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Yemen, Gaza, and the West Bank. We've been operating for about a little over 4 years. First graduating class was June of '06. And the skills that we teach are the skills that we're told are needed. For instance, the first program we ever launched was in Jordan, and we mentored the education minister, brilliant man, Khalid Toukan, a towering figure in the country, MIT graduate. And after several meetings and over an informal dinner, I said, Khalid, if we could do just one thing only, what would we be teaching? And he looked at me and he said, soft skills. I didn't know what the hell soft skills were. I didn't have a clue. The good news is my staff is a lot more understanding of this realm than I, and I went back and we found through our educational director probably the most powerful soft skill program that's available, and it was owned by McGraw-Hill. And soft skills, for those that don't know, are how to write a resume, critical thinking, teaching, leadership, how to behave in the workplace, how to work with others, how to speak, how to dress, what to say at work, what not to say at work, work ethic. And so we have this program from McGraw-Hill that's 96 hours that we teach over a 2 or 3 month period. And it is transforming. What it really does, which I didn't understand at all, I don't know what a lot of us did, was in addition to giving the skills that the youth need, it gives them something more powerful. It gives them self-confidence. These kids leave our program as self-fulfilling prophecies. They really believe that they can succeed and that they are very special because they're a graduate of this program. And so we launched it in Jordan at, I believe, Al-Azhar University. We had 85% success. We said, that's pretty good, but they're university graduates. We then took it to a slum, and we launched it through a neighborhood center. And once again, we had 85% success rate. And so we now have taken that program and we have migrated it all over the Middle East. And we sometimes teach it by itself, and sometimes we teach it with other skills. So for instance, we have a program in Jordan that I think is amazing. In order to qualify for this program, you need to have failed your high school exit exam. And so these are kids that are really going nowhere. And so we teach them soft skills so they show up to work on time, and they know how to behave in the workplace. Equally important, we teach them how to install and repair air conditioners. And so we've had a very high success rate there of doing that. Once again, roughly 85%. We also, one of our board members in Jordan raised her hand about 2 years ago and said to us, in Jordan, there's not a decent program in land surveying. Handed us a check and said, build the course, we'll hire the first 40 graduates. So we're responsive to the needs of the labor market. The people that come to us with concepts of, one of the programs we were looking at was emergency medical technicians or paraveterinarians. And so we did a lot of homework, and we found at the end of the day, it wasn't going to work. There weren't going to be the jobs. And so we function in a marketplace where we look for jobs that we know exist. Oftentimes we work with employers, and the employers become our partner. They pay us fees for placing their graduates. They help us locate, interview the graduates. We do the location and the training, and it's very collaborative, and it's very effective. We also work with our alumnus afterwards, and we have them continue to grow and expand. One of our key relationships with is a company called Manpower. Manpower is one of the largest employers in the world. They're a $22 billion a year company, and we're fortunate in that the president of Manpower International is on our board and a very strong advocate of our work. And one of the things that he provides, which has been phenomenal, is all of our graduates, for free, can take courses that they teach to their clients for thousands of dollars. And they have 3,600 courses online that any graduate can just dial in and expand who they are and further themselves. They also have assessment tools. They can send, some of them started in all places in China. They can sit down a potential student and tell him, as the result of a test, whether he should be an entrepreneur, whether or not he should be a banker. And the success rate of that is very, very high. There's tremendous correlation. And so we've been able to make that alumni association, in some instances, self-sustaining. We're operating in Yemen. In Yemen, we've had a tremendous amount of success. Our chairman is a gentleman by the name of Alwan Shabani, and he has raised over $500,000 locally in Yemen to help fund our activities. And the Alumni Association gets $10 a month from every student, which doesn't sound like a lot, but the income in Yemen is an average of $537 per year. And that Alumni Association is now self-sustaining. The challenge that we have is we're told by the World Bank that by the year 2020, there'll be needed 100 million new jobs. And you're in an area right now which has the largest youth bulge and the largest unemployment of youth in the world. And just to maintain the status quo, you need 100 million new jobs because of the tremendous population growth. And so the work that we're doing, we believe, will have serious impact, not only in terms of the graduates, and the number of graduates we've had has been scaling up radically. I think through last year we had 1,000 graduates. This year we will have about 1,500 graduates. Next year we project 3,000 graduates, but I think we will do closer to 5, because the 3,000 graduates are already lined up. Everything is in place for that, and we seem to be getting new support elsewhere. And so my hope is we'll do much more than that. Equally important, some of the educational institutions are noticing what we're doing and are looking to us for help. For instance, King Hassan II, the third largest public university in Morocco, has come to us and said, our percentage of graduates that get jobs is not what it should be. And starting next year, we're working with them to radically increase the percentage of jobs, the youth that get jobs there. We're also looking to create whole new marketplaces. We just got a grant from the IFC, World Bank, to go forward and see if nursing is feasible in Yemen. In that region, there's a tremendous nursing shortage. And it's our hope that we will build a world-class nursing school there and empower thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of women to join the labor force as very highly qualified nurses. We're working with Simmons College in Boston, we're working with NYU in New York, and we will create, inshallah, world-class nursing. And so we are expanding, we are struggling. These are not easy parts of the world to operate, but we've been very fortunate. Our local boards have bought into it, they have taken ownership, and they're enabling us to expand and grow and become sustainable. All of our 5 foundations, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Yemen, Gaza, and the West Bank, are now self-sustaining. Self-sustaining from grants that they get on their own or that they get with our help, or fees that they're charging for placing graduates, or because it's been recognized that our training courses are very powerful, we're now doing those courses and using some of the revenue from those to pay for some of the costs of dealing with the most needy. And so that is our mission, that is who we are, and we will have a short video and then a Q&A, and then Jasmine will speak. Thank you.
I think we all can see how important a job is, and how a job is more than just a job. It's about your own dignity, your own self-esteem, your sense of being part of a society, your ability to take care of your children and the future of your family. It's so much more than a paycheck.
Since its founding in 2002, the Education for Employment Foundation has created opportunities for young people in the Middle East and North Africa through professional skills training programs that lead directly to jobs, serving as a catalyst for more successful, happier lives.
I learned many things from the YEFE course. There were 4 modules, which focus on soft skills. We learn how to be prepared for the job market after graduating from university, how to present ourselves, and how to write a resume. We also learn how to set goals for ourselves and to have a vision for the future.
After the September 11th attacks shook his hometown of New York City, Ron Bruder, YEFE founder and CEO, took a deep interest in the problems of the Middle East and discovered a tremendous lack of economic opportunity in the region. YEFE addresses this problem through an apolitical, pragmatic approach that facilitates the creation of more stable and productive societies by focusing on jobs as the fundamental element.
All of the programs that we do are directly linked to needs in the marketplace. We know where the jobs are at graduation. I think that's what makes us different. And one of the reasons we can know where the jobs are is because our board of directors and our other advisors in the country tell us where the jobs are. So when we finish the process, we're not standing there with hope, we're standing there with knowledge and power.
It's a win-win for everyone, for the companies, for the country, and for the youth themselves.
YEFE currently operates in Jordan, West Bank and Gaza, Morocco, Egypt, and Yemen. Each affiliate is led by local business and civic leaders who have the passion and the insight to help close the gap between young talent and the demands of the business community.
Why do I do this work? The inspiration comes from, just visiting a class and seeing what a student can do that far exceeds whatever expectations I might have had or any of the team that I work with has. It's worth $1 million.
The remarkable impact YEFE makes in the lives of these youth is exemplified in the story of Mabruk al-Samini, a young man born and raised in a rural village in Yemen, one of the poorest countries in the world, with a youth unemployment rate currently around 36%. Mabruk's life and the lives of those around him were transformed by the training he received through YEFE.
Mabruk is one of our unique students. We always look for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, and he fit the criteria perfectly. Prior to joining Yemen YEFE, he'd spent almost 2 years unemployed looking for work, and he'd given up hope. He first tried to look for employment around his hometown, and he spent like 16 months looking for work in Amran, and that's where he decided that he had to move out of the world that he was living in and come to Sana'a to look for employment. He spent another 12 months looking for employment, which just led to more frustration.
Mabruk's participation in a Yemen YEFE workplace success course was the impetus that began to turn things around for him.
كيف تجهز المقابلة الشخصية؟ كيف ترتب وقتك؟ كيف التنظيم التخطيط؟ كنا غافلين وبعد ما لحقنا المسيح علمتنا أشياء كثيرة.
Then he was given an opportunity to put all the learning into practice at the Arwa Plastics Company. And within 2 weeks, we received a call from the general manager of the company requesting to keep him on. And that's where he signed his contract, and he's never looked back since.
Over the next 15 years, more than 100 million new job seekers in the Middle East and North Africa will try to enter the workforce. Despite YEFE's impressive successes, achieving youth employment on a mass scale remains a significant challenge. To this end, YEFE has fostered an across-the-board culture of cooperation with other nonprofits, with the private sector, with government agencies, as well as academic institutions, which have been inspired to replicate YEFE's effective programs.
Many organizations that work with disadvantaged youth populations spend a lot of time focusing on the needs of the young person, which is very admirable, but often that's disconnected from the needs of the businesses where they end up being employed. And YEFE is really trying to do both, understand the business needs as well as provide the supports that young people need to succeed in the world of work.
We see the private sector really wanting a lot, and then we see the university graduates graduating saying, here, I've done what I'm supposed to do, you know, I've got the skills. They just need the small push, and once they get it, they're actually there.
It's a marvelous example of social entrepreneurship, and it represents a solution to one of the great problems of the Middle East.
This program gives us a big chance.
Ultimately, YEFE's greatest strength may lie in the power of its grateful alumni, who are now eager to give back to their families, their communities, and society at large. Few students demonstrate that spirit of gratitude more than Hamza al-Hadawi of Amman, Jordan.
When Hamza started, I mean, he wasn't so smiley. He wasn't smiling as much. He was a very quiet boy who would just listen, and slowly I saw him. I saw the transformation, the smile coming to his face, the sparkle in the eye. That's what's so fulfilling, is to see these youth with hope.
It was really my mother who raised me because my father was always busy. He traveled a lot. There wasn't time to spend with him. When he returned, we didn't have anything, just the house he bought us. I was the son who tried to help him. I told him, "You've done enough. I will work until I lift the burden from your shoulders."
I saw his mother in the graduation. She's almost crying because he is the first child in the family who got a certificate. He wants his family to be happy, to be proud about him, because he said, my father sacrificed a lot and I need this old man to feel happy.
At the Bluefig restaurant, I'm working my way up, step by step, striving to reach my goals, to allow my family to be comfortable, to help with expenses, and to build my future too.
Like so many other YEFE graduates, Hamza's commitment to YEFE training, combined with his natural talent and determination to succeed, is leading him and his family to a brighter future.
Thank you. Good evening. It's great to be here. I want to thank David Speedie and the Carnegie Council for having us here tonight, and for all of you for joining us. Just want to make a few remarks. I think Ron and the film have said it all, and we really want to have a discussion with all of you, hear your questions, and engage in dialogue. Just want to make a couple short remarks, really to provide a framework of what I think is distinctive about YEFE. Last time I was here at the council, Matthew Bishop, the New York bureau chief of The Economist, who wrote a book called Philanthrocapitalism, gave a presentation. And what he said is what's very distinctive about philanthrocapitalists, people like Ron Bruder and many others, are that they bring innovation as well as they're willing to take risk. And that's really their contribution to projects, for example, international development projects. And I think the risk profile you can appreciate. The innovation, I think, is twofold. One is the way we do our work. As you've seen, we incubate and launch national foundations. We create a network of locally run organizations. We don't open up branch offices. We don't go in as Americans and run the projects in these countries. We really incubate, provide seed funding, technical know-how, ongoing oversight, management support to really help people in the region build their own foundations. The board of directors come from those countries. The staff who run the entities you saw on the film are Egyptian, they're Yemeni, they're Palestinian. And we're partners based on mutual respect and understanding. We provide them with tools and support, but they run their foundations because they know their countries best. And we think that's very key for both sustainability and scale. because we have national business leaders and education leaders who run these foundations. They're able to bring in their networks in their countries. They're able to attract funding from local government sources, from foundations in their own country, from international donors. And they're also highly scalable because they're building on local networks. So these projects aren't short-term, they're there for decades and hopefully longer to come. The other innovation, I think, is that this is very much a demand-driven model. There are many organizations that train youth and that provide employability training to prepare youth for the job market. This is not new. What's different is our methodology, the way we engage companies. We first start with the companies, we understand their hiring needs, we talk to them about the specific skills-based competencies they need from fresh graduates to be willing to hire them. For example, a recent PwC Maktoum Foundation report that polled 600 Arab CEOs in the region, asked them what skills they're looking for from fresh graduates. And the CEOs talked about communication skills, teamwork, leadership skills, analytical skills, language skills, innovation, capability to innovate, and IT awareness. These are the 9 top skills required by Arab CEOs recruiting youth. In the universities there, they teach one major thing apart from technical competencies, and that is rote memorization. They do not teach communication, teamwork, leadership, innovation, creativity. So this is the gap, this education gap we talk about that we're stepping into to provide these kinds of skills in a very interactive, role-play-based pedagogy that we're very used to here in the United States, but does not exist in public schools in these countries. People who can afford to go to school abroad or private schools certainly get exposure to these skills, but not the young people with limited opportunity who we're working with. So this demand-driven approach and providing these same Arab CEOs who have also said they do not engage with the education system to help prepare the workforce because they don't necessarily know how to do it. There aren't enough venues to do that. So we provide a platform for companies to tell us their training needs, to work with us to adapt curricula, to come into our classrooms as guest speakers to share their experiences and inspire young people. And so we promote social mobility by helping young people get access to these corporate leaders as mentors and to learn from them. So we measure success by our placement rate, not by the number of students we train or by the amount of training that we provide, but we have an internal target of 85% job placement for all of our graduates. We also make sure that they are retained on the job, and we provide a lot of support to them as alumni for ongoing personal and professional development, as well as community engagement. So we're very, very close to the thousands of young people in our network.
So you see, from Matthew Bishop to YEFE, we have philanthro-capitalism covered.
We got it covered.
At the Carnegie Council. I ought to mention too, by the way, that both of our guests have just come back from trips. You spend a lot of time, obviously. You don't sit here in New York. Jasmine was telling me she'd just been to Algeria. I didn't get the chance to ask Ron where he's been all over the globe, but that may be an interesting thing to get into in Q&A. The floor is open. Please introduce yourselves, and again, it helps if you allow Caitlin to hold the mic for the recording. David Hunt.
Hi, I'm David Hunt. I have a question about attitudes towards entrepreneurship in the Middle East. I've been listening to a long tome, a book on tape called The History of the Middle East by a British historian, which I've been doing for about 18 months when I have the stomach for this very long and rather dry account. But one of the ideas that came out of this was that the exploitation by the British and the French colonial powers in the Middle East, the setting up of factories and exploiting the locals in a rather, difficult way, let's say, has created attitudes among the elites in the Arab world really against business and against entrepreneurship. And I was wondering, as Jasmine was talking about the lack of skills, leadership skills, why it is in the schools there that they have not considered those things important. So my question is, those of you who are working in the Middle East, is this a real barrier to progress, attitudes that have been handed down through generations now, really a holdover from the French and British colonial period? Thank you.
Can I answer that? Thank you for that question. they've polled youth in the Arab world, and across the board, about 30% of young people would like to start their own businesses. And we have met many, many, many entrepreneurial people. So I don't mean to contradict this author, but from my own personal anecdotal experience and from reading these polls, I think that there's a great spirit of entrepreneurship that's still alive and well in the region. The problem, especially for young people, is access to capital, access to incubation, mentors, networks, and opportunity. There's also a poll done by Gallup that showed that young people in the Middle East really, if they've worked for at least 1 year in a job, they're much more likely to become entrepreneurs and to be successful. And so young people who cannot get jobs then don't have that link to become successful entrepreneurs. So from my point of view, I think the issue is not so much attitude, it's opportunity.
I'd like to just add one comment. There is some relevance to what you're saying. In some of the countries that we operate, I speak to youth, and there's a tremendous desire by a large number of them to go to work for government at much lower salaries and with no real future, but it gives them the perceived prestige, and it also gives them the perceived security. And so the joke in Egypt, for instance, is the Egyptian government has this bloated bureaucracy, and you pretend to go to work for the government pretends to pay you. It's sort of a difficult situation. And so there's not in many instances a willingness to take risks, although that seems to be changing, and the work that we do, I think, facilitates that change.
That quote about pretending to pay was also prevalent in the late days of the Soviet Union. I don't want to be too gloomy. Yes.
Lawrence Meltzer. Are there opportunities for you to work with local schools, or do you have to set up your own organization?
We do not set up our own organization. We find that a much more efficient deployment of capital is to bring in master trainers and to train existing teachers there and then go home, but continue to monitor and work with those trainers. So you won't go to the region and find any YEFE schools. You'll find YEFE programs becoming more and more prevalent. But we work with existing institutions of all stripes. I was on the phone this morning. We have a program that it's been very successful in the West Bank. We take youth and we teach engineers. There's a plethora of engineers in the West Bank, but there's a very strong paucity of jobs for engineers. So we have built a curriculum in Colorado State University, and we trained 18 instructors in the West Bank to teach construction management. It's a very powerful curriculum. There are jobs available for construction managers. And so we work through the Engineers Association for that. We have another program, also West Bank, where we're teaching business English, we're teaching soft skills, and we're teaching the mini MBA program that we built at Maryland University. And some of it we do directly at our offices, and for instance, the business English we farm out. So it's a combination. But we don't have the capital, quite frankly, or the interest in building our own institutions. If we're going to effectuate large-scale change, it's better facilitated by working with the existing institutions and having them be the beneficiary of our methodology and our curriculum.
Thank you, James Ronald. Thank you for the presentation as well. In it, you highlighted some of the big problems that are facing the region. The high unemployment that already exists there, the weaknesses in the education system, and this demographic thing, which indicates there's going to be a greater number of people in this age group as the years go by. In your dealings with the UN and the Arab League and governments out there, have you got any reason to think that the problem isn't going to do anything but get a whole lot worse?
Do you want to take that one? I'll take it. I'm optimistic. I have to be optimistic to do this work. If I didn't think we were providing solutions, I'd go back and stay in the US and build more shopping centers. I think there's a growing awareness of the needs of the labor market and the needs of the educational system to align themselves with those needs. So I am optimistic. I see changes. I see the work we're doing expanding, being taken up by us as well as being taken up by others. And so I believe the challenge will be met, and I think we'll be a part of that.
If I could also add to that, we're seeing that there are a number of donors rallying around this cause of youth employment. $100 million and billion-dollar funds that are being set up by Arabs and others in Europe and the US to focus on this issue, as well as a number of multinational companies who are really getting engaged, both to promote entrepreneurship as well as direct job placement. So I think that there's been an emerging consensus and more momentum in the past couple of years to devote significant capital and create significant partnerships.
From what you're saying, is all the work that's being done by private groups like yourself and private capital, and is none of it being done by the actual governments?
Multilateral agencies like the ILO and the UN are involved, in the World Bank. Governments, I think so, depends on the country. What we're trying to do is present a model that works to the governments so that the public institutions with the government support can scale up. In Morocco, we're creating a partnership with ministries in Jordan as well. So they're very interested in this. I think what we have to do is present successful models that work and that can be taken to scale. And then we find that a number of governments are very interested in going to scale with the support of organizations like the ILO and the UN. In other countries, the governments may be less interested. So there's a range.
Let me ask, if I may, Ron, a question that's a bit along the lines of the first question about contextual and historical barriers, or things that may intrude that make the situation even more difficult for you. In reading your program in the West Bank and Gaza, the mini MBA business training program there, you say that as of February 2008, 100% of the pilot class from Gaza is employed. The second and third classes are in the job placement process. Overall, 33% of graduates have been placed. This rate is due in part to the closed border in Gaza and the delay in obtaining work visas for Palestinians to work abroad. This must fall into the category of frustration for you when you, with the eager young minds, but the mega political context literally providing a barrier.
Well, 4 days ago I was in West Bank, and the good news is there are more opportunities for citizens of Gaza to get out than there were 2 or 3 months ago. There seems to be more of an opening in the Egyptian side. So we are scurrying right now to take our graduates from Gaza and move them into mostly the Gulf. We had a course there that we launched in 2008, and it was a strategic partnership with a Palestinian organization called CCC. CCC is the largest construction company in the Middle East. The head of it is a gentleman by the name of Samar Khoury. Samar operates out of Athens. He employs 174,000 people. He's a member of our board in the US, and he's a very strong proponent of our work. In 2008, he came to us and said, there are all these accountants graduating in Gaza, but they don't have work skills. And when they leave school, they really don't have the necessary skills to be of any value. And so together with his staff and our staff, we built this mini MBA program. And it was highly successful. I remember the first time in 2008, Sama came over for a board meeting, and we went through all the niceties. We had breakfast and exchanged family situations, etc. And at the end, I said, okay, Sama, how do you feel about the quality of our graduates? Are they getting the job done? And he said, it's amazing. For whatever reason, that's mini MBA that you're teaching them enables them to think. And what it does is it takes them through 8 quarters of a business cycle, and they have to solve problems. And these kids never really had to solve problems before. And so they learned out-of-the-box thinking, they learned critical thinking, they learned problem solving. And it was a huge advantage, and our graduates in the Gulf are doing quite well. And in terms of sustainability, those youth were giving back 10% of their salary after they leave and go to work in the Gulf. And it's amazing. I was in Egypt also last week, and 60% of our graduates, and these are poor kids, and they're not starting off with very high salaries, 60% of our graduates from the Egyptian programs are giving back voluntarily funds to our Cairo office so that the next generation or the next group can be the beneficiary.
David, if I could add to that, it has been frustrating in the past 2 years to not be able to continue to place young people in Gaza. But I think it also shows the strength of our model, which is that we haven't shut down and left. There are organizations that have to do that because the government funding or other funding sources end as a result of the situation there, and they shut down and they leave. But because this is a Palestinian YEFE organization based in the region, run by Palestinians, it's there to stay, and we can wait this out until there are greater opportunities to place young people in jobs within Gaza and outside.
One of the ways we dealt with it, which I thought kind of interesting, is one of our board members, Hassan Shawa, runs the Bank of Palestine. And he's our board member in West Bank, but he also has branches in Gaza. And so while Gaza has been sealed and we couldn't get people out and create new jobs, he knew of all these very highly qualified teachers that we had in Gaza, and he hired us to train his existing staff, the program, and we used some of the profit from that, actually all the profit from that, to subsidize some of the work we're doing in the West Bank. So we continue to improve the quality of labor. We made money, we generated revenue, and we enhanced the work we're doing in the West Bank.
Okay. Other thoughts, questions?
Danielle Candy, Carnegie Council. My question was on accessibility. I know here in the States there's many programs open to students. However, if you don't take that extra initiative to go see your advisor, go talk to your mentor, sit down with your professor, you don't know about the opportunities that are often out there for you. How accessible are your programs to people in the Middle East, especially youth? Do you go out and seek them? Do they have to seek you? Is it through schools only? I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little more.
Well, basically, we're looking for youth that are the most disadvantaged. Also, we're looking for youth that are most motivated. And so, for instance, when we started operation in Gaza and we opened for business, nobody came. And the reason nobody came is they did not believe that the graduates would actually get decent paying jobs. And as soon as our first graduating class went off to the Gulf and started making, by their standards, pretty serious money, we were besieged. And so when we launch a new program, it depends on the program, depends on the country, depends on the demographic we're looking for. For instance, we have a sales program that we built in Morocco because the largest company in Morocco who's on our board said we need to learn about sales. 55% of those graduates are female. And so we focused our recruiting towards women, which we do, quite frankly, heavily throughout the region because we believe that you can make a much stronger social change by educating a woman and a man. And so if you look at our graduating numbers, like 40% of our graduates in Yemen are women, which is an off-the-charts number and took a lot of work to achieve. But we're open to everybody. We're not elitist. We sometimes advertise. Sometimes we want people to be motivated. Sometimes we'll charge 50 pounds, $10, so they have some skin in the game and they take the course seriously. But we use whatever methodology we think is appropriate for the youth that we're trying to bring into that program.
Oh, thank you. The work you do, is it concentrated on large urban environments, or is it also spread out throughout the more regional parts of whatever country area you're working in?
That's a good question. If you had asked the question last year, we would not have been spread out. We would have just stayed into the main city environments because, quite frankly, it's easier. But one of the things that's happened is in the last year, as we've grown, we've taken challenges to go to the more rural areas, and we're doing so more and more at a very fast clip. A year ago, we were really focused because we couldn't do everything for everybody, and we want to impact as many youth as possible. But now, through requests from donors or just because we see the need, we've been moving out into the rural areas. And for instance, we started in Sana'a in Yemen. I never thought we'd go beyond Sana'a. We're now in Taiz, and we're opening an office next year in Aden. So we're spreading out rapidly in these countries because the need is there.
And in the West Bank, since the beginning, our strategy was always to get people drawn from the entire region into our program. So the training actually took place in Ramallah initially, but we brought in and paid transportation stipends to bring students from Nablus and Hebron and all over. Because of the fragmentation of the country, we wanted to make sure that people outside of Ramallah did have access. So that was always part of our strategy in the Palestinian territories in the West Bank.
A question on modalities. Speak just a little bit more about going into a Yemen, for example, and setting up a staff, a board, recruiting board. How long did that take?
Actually, it was much easier than I expected for a few reasons. One is by the time we went into Yemen, and we've been in Yemen about 2 years, we had a track record from other countries. So when you go in with a track record, life is easier.
Yeah.
Secondly, we have strategic partnerships. I mentioned CCC, Consolidated Contractors. They are the 13th largest construction company in the world, clearly the largest dominant construction company in the region. And the gentleman that ran the CCC office in Yemen was told that this was his priority, to get us organized, to introduce us to the right people, to throw dinner parties, to introduce us to the ambassadors, and to move things forward. And when we started, we also had an advantage. We had a grant of $288,000 from the Middle East Partnership Initiative. And one of our staff had gone there prior to my actually going to Yemen and had laid the groundwork. So we started to have some infrastructure in place. And I remember I went there and I gave a PowerPoint presentation, explained what we were doing and why we were doing it and how we thought it could help. And I basically said, the good news is, I was much more polite than this, but get to the quick. I said, we have $288,000 and we can spend it in Yemen, but we need $144,000 from Yemeni money. We want to know that you believe in this. And so I said, I'm getting on a plane later today, and unless I see a show of hands that there's some interest, we are not coming back. And people raised hands, and they meant it. And we raised $50,000, then $144,000, and then $500,000, and more money keeps on going in. And the power in Yemen, for instance, is we found a gentleman by the name of Alwan Shebani. Alwan ran the Yemeni Airlines. He owns the DHL franchise, the Hertz franchise. He's 72 years old, he thinks. He's not sure, approximately. And he's a wonderful human being. And if you ask him what his passion is and what he does nowadays, it's YEFE. So he has taken the foundation and grown it to where it is with our help and support. But it has done much better and much quicker because we've been able to find people like that.
And I think going back in time when we first started in Gaza and Morocco, for example, we didn't have a brand name, we didn't have matching funds, we didn't have anything on the ground, no track record, nothing. So it took literally 10 visits to Morocco, 10 flights, 4 of us, many cups of tea, and a lot of discussion to gain trust. It was all about trust. And I think what people liked is that the model was new, that we were not looking to set up a branch office. We were looking to have our partners serve on the board and control the entity with matching funds from us, but to have them really be in control. And I think it took a lot of visits. So we spent 1 to 2 years just flying to these countries and just talking to people. And that, again, is where an individual like Ron, who was able to underwrite that investment, which a typical donor would not ever do, was really essential. And once we've built the first 4, then Yemen was much easier. And now going into new countries will be much easier. I just came back from Algeria, where we're not yet present. And there's tremendous, tremendous interest. And because we now have a methodology and clarity in terms of how we roll this out and a track record in other countries, you know, I imagine it would only take 6 months to set up the board and to find the business leaders and education leaders. But at first it was at least 2 years.
And that leads to just one final question, really, and that is that I don't think it's unfair or an understatement to say that this isn't exactly front page news in terms of public perception and even the elite press in this country of what's going on in Yemen. I mean, for most people, Yemen, to the extent they know anything, they know that the USS Cole was bombed there with loss of American life a few years ago. That it's now being portrayed quite frequently as a quasi-functional state and so on. I mean, is this worth getting out, that there are these positive things going on? I mean, obviously your circles know it. But back in the West?
The issue with the press, I believe, and this is not an area I know, but I have a daughter who's a journalism professor at Columbia, and she always likes to say, if it bleeds, it leads. Well, this isn't bleeding news. This, we think, is good news, and therefore it's not as exciting for the press to pick up. But sometimes we kid internally that we are the best kept secret around because we're doing work in all these countries and we're having impact, and yet the world doesn't know about us. And so we are taking efforts to change that.
You certainly are, and just to bring it full circle, it's a remarkable program. I mean, I can't think of anything else that's so, as I say, a genuine engagement that involves academic institutions, government agencies, international organizations, local business leaders, and of course the communities where the need is greatest. So, Jasmine, Nahhas, Florio, and Ron Bruder, congratulations and many thanks.
Thanks for the opportunity, David. Thank you.